Hello and welcome. My name is Nicolas and I'm the executive chef with Merit Clubs. Today we'll be doing a small how-to demonstration on the proper technique of sous videing a steak. The only requirements needed for sous videing a steak is an actual sous vide itself. We are using a poly-science sous vide. We also have a vacuum sealer to our right. This is not something that is required in the process of sous videing a steak, but it is recommended. The way to circumvent this issue would be by using a ZIPLOC gallon bag. Any ZIPLOC bag for this process will be more than acceptable as long as you're positive that there is no air getting inside of the bag. When choosing the proper size for your proteins, you want to make sure that the bag is as closely sized to the piece of meat that you are sous videing. Today we have two strip steaks, New York strips from our local market. We haven't adjusted these steaks in any way, haven't taken any of the fat off, just center cut New York strips. Aside from that, we also have a little bit of thyme, fresh garlic, a bottle of blended oil, and I want to be specific that we do not need any salt yet. Salting too early in this process will extract all of the moisture from the protein itself, and that is not something that we want to do before putting it in water. We're going to put just a little bit of blended oil on this, nothing too crazy. Other chefs in this process may choose to go with something like whole butter, and either of these are suitable for the application. I just would not recommend using extra virgin olive oil. I would recommend on using a blended oil. After I rub the steaks with a little bit of oil, I'm just eyeballing a couple pieces of whole garlic for my steaks. And then these packages of thyme were little 1 ounce packages of thyme, and I would recommend using at least half, but nowhere as close as to a full. The longer you sous vide something, the more of this flavor will be extracted, and you want to stay away from any thick stems before bagging. After assuring that there are no stems on your steaks, we're going to take our cryovac bag. It is best practice to fold these back over to assure that there is no fat on the part of the bag that we will be sealing in here. This is something that's not going to matter when it comes to using a ZIPLOC baggie. Dry our hands off of any excess oil that may be on them before I pull my bag edges back up. We're going to set our steak that is already bagged with the thyme and garlic inside of our vacuum machine. So now that our steak is done being vacuum sealed, we can see that the steak is fully without any oxygen remaining in the bag, which is a very good sign. Before we dump it in the water, we also want to check that our seal is completely sealed. That'll ensure that when I put this in there that no water is going into our bag, but that will also make sure that our steak stays submerged in water and no longer floating. Sous vide is currently set to 120 degrees. I'm probably going to turn it up about 5 more degrees. The biggest part of steak know-how is that our temperatures range from 115 degrees to 155. Starting at 115 degrees is your section of rare, and then 10 degree increments from that point up to 155 is where you hit your well done. So this bag just goes straight into our sous vide, and the first thing I'm looking for is that it sinks, we're not floating, and everything I'm seeing so far is perfect. It does take a second to settle down, but after that, we're good to go. Sous videing a steak takes roughly an hour and a half, but don't fear. You are able to leave your protein in this submerged bath of water indefinitely. After an hour and a half of time, that is when we're able to pull our steak out and know that all of our garlic and thyme has marinated nicely. At this time, the steak feels very delicate, and the muscles itself feel much looser than they were back when the steak was cold. You can tell now that the steak is actually very tender, and some of our fat line across the top of our New York strip has now become more liquefied. And that is just to discard the seasonings that we used for the steak. After that, we want to take a couple napkins and pat dry our steak before getting into a hot pan. This is what our steak looked like from the original out of the package before we put our thyme and garlic on top of it, before we sous vide it. And now we have what a steak looks like out of sous vide bag, sitting here drying on some napkins right now because we want to ensure that this piece of protein is as dry as we can possibly get it before we put this into a raging hot pan of oil. Aside from the steak that we sous vide today, we also have a container of thyme and garlic We're just using this to fortify our butter while basting at the end. Just about 2 ounces of butter, cubed up, room temperature, and just some salt and pepper here to finish. Have a basting spoon and just a pair of tongs. Our pan has been preheating now for roughly 20 minutes. Doing this at home without a cast iron pan, you want to ensure that this pan is as hot as it can possibly get to get a proper hard sear on both sides of this protein. Just a very, very light coating of oil for our pan. We want to ensure that this oil is as hot as it can possibly be without smoking. Now that our oil is hot, we can get our steak going in our pan. We're going to get our sear going on our first side. After we flip the steak, we are going to start basting with butter. Pushing on our steak to make sure that there's full contact on all of the pan, making sure that all of that oil that I put in the pan is also coating the side of the steak that we're searing. It's going to take roughly no longer than 2 minutes and a maximum of 4 minutes per side. And that's looking pretty good. At this point is where I want to flip my steak over. I'm going to turn back my heat just a little bit. I'm going to ensure that my steak has full contact in the base of my pan. I'm going to take a little bit of my fresh thyme and put it on top of my steak. You can also throw a little knob of garlic in there. Then we're going to go straight in with about 2 ounces of butter. So I'm waiting for my butter to melt a little bit, and I'm waiting for my butter to start foaming up a little bit. Using this butter, I'm able to pull my pan back and baste my steak. Let's bring our steak a little bit closer. But putting this hot, sizzling butter back on top of our steak is now doing the same exact thing that is happening on the bottom of our steak against the pan. Adding this butter to the top is also adding the buttery flavor back into our steak, and it is also cooking the garlic and thyme that I threw into this pan. How long you baste your steak is completely up to you. What I'm looking for while basting is some of these lighter areas right here, and that is what I am trying to aim at. The more I aim at these lighter areas of my steak, the more I can ensure that they're cooking and getting the same type of crispy skin that the rest of my steak has. Now that we're done sauteing our steak in our saute pan, it's time to pull our steak out and make sure we rest it. Now that our steak is finished resting, you can see that some of the liquid has come back out of the steak, and this isn't okay. We are looking to see a little bit of this happening as our steak is resting. Through the resting process, our steak is actually getting tender again. If you're not letting your steak rest, then this muscle is staying extra tight, and that is not what we want. How beautifully our steak has been cooked in the center. After all of that time it's spent in the pan, we did not jeopardize any of the beautiful pinkness left inside of our steak. So we're able to use our sous vide to sous vide asparagus. It also works great for vegetables, keeps it tender inside the package. You're also able to marinate it however you would please. Pop this bag open now too. We sous vide vegetables a little bit hotter, around 184 degrees, which is the temperature that vegetable proteins denature. Let's get our steak moved nicely onto our plate. Coarse Maldon salt. This is a great salt for finishing a steak. And we just want to put a little bit of that Maldon right onto the middle, right down the center, so guest gets a little bite of that salt and every piece of their steak.